You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
On June 8, 1989, the body of a Vancouver nurse was discovered bound in a vacant lot after years of escalating threats and fear. What began as unsettling phone calls had spiraled into violent attacks, eerie sightings, and a disappearance that gripped an entire community. Decades later, her case remains one of Canada's most chilling unsolved mysteries, haunting for the questions it leaves behind and the thin line it treads between relentless stalking and psychological collapse. If you crave true account-style horror stories that stay with you long after they're over, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. At Soul Studios, we tell the stories you were never meant to hear. And this one will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fear. June 8, 1989. A maintenance worker in Richmond, British Columbia stops cold. In the overgrown yard of an abandoned house lies the corpse of a 44-year-old woman. Her hands and feet are bound tightly behind her back, and a black nylon stocking is knotted around her throat. At first glance, it looks like a brutal homicide, yet investigators will soon be torn between 2 impossible explanations. Was this nurse the victim of an obsessive stalker who toyed with her for years? Or could the most relentless threat have come from deep within her own mind? Cindy James was a kind, hard-working nurse living a quiet life in Vancouver in the early 1980s. But shortly after separating from her husband in 1982, something shifted. Late one night, the phone rang. Cindy lifted the receiver to nothing but eerie silence and faint breathing. She frowned and hung up, unsettled. Then it rang again. And again. Sometimes an angry voice on the line would hiss threats at her. Other times there was only that chilling, wordless breathing. In the following weeks, the harassment escalated. Cindy would come home to find her porch light smashed and the phone line severed. Anonymous, crude notes began appearing at her doorstep, scrawled menacing messages made from cut-out letters. Each one seemed to scream a singular obsession. "You're dead, Cindy." Neighbors reported seeing a prowler in the dead of night, but whenever Cindy rushed to a window, she only caught a glimpse of shadows. The police were called repeatedly, and though they took reports, they found no fingerprints, no leads, nothing but Cindy's mounting fear. By the spring of 1983, Cindy was living in terror. She confided in her parents and closest friends that a mysterious tormentor was targeting her, intent not just on killing her, but on scaring her to death. One close friend, Agnes, began spending more time at Cindy's house out of concern. That decision may have saved Cindy's life at least once. One chilly evening, Agnes stopped by unannounced. Finding the house dark, she knocked. No answer. Worried, she peered through a window and thought she heard a muffled whimper. Alarmed, Agnes let herself into the yard, and there, crouched beside the garage, was Cindy. A nylon stocking had been savagely knotted around Cindy's neck, choking her. Her face was purple, eyes bulging in panic. Gasping for breath, Cindy croaked that she had gone to fetch something from the garage when someone grabbed her from behind. All she glimpsed of the attacker was a pair of white sneakers disappearing into the night. Agnes's appearance had likely frightened the assailant off. Cindy survived this attack, but it left a deep psychological scar. Whoever was doing this could strike at any moment, even in her own yard. Determined to protect herself, Cindy took drastic measures. She moved to a new house in a different neighborhood, hoping to shake off the stalker. She even repainted her car and changed her last name, as if shedding her old identity could free her from this nightmare. She also hired a private investigator, Ozzy Caban, to help watch over her. For a time, things were quiet. Perhaps the fresh start had worked. Then the calls returned. The familiar, breathy silence on the line. Click, dial tone. Cindy's relief shattered. The stalker was still out there. Ozzy Caban equipped Cindy with a two-way radio so she could call for help at any sign of trouble. It didn't take long. Late one night, the PI Caban was monitoring his radio when a burst of garbled noise came through from Cindy's end. Then her terrified voice. "Help!" The signal cut out abruptly. Caban's gut lurched. He raced to Cindy's house and found it locked and dark. Peering through a window, his flashlight beam slid across the living room and caught a motionless figure on the floor. Caban shattered the front window to get inside, fearing the worst. Cindy lay unconscious on the carpet with a kitchen paring knife stabbed through her hand, pinning a note to the floor next to her. Blood pooled around her palm where the blade skewered it into the carpet. The note was a chilling collage of letters cut from magazines, spelling out, "Now you must die." Caban's heart pounded as he checked her pulse. Faint, but there. As he dialed 911, Cindy suddenly stirred, whimpering in pain and confusion. Paramedics arrived within minutes. When Cindy came to in the hospital, she haltingly recalled what happened. She remembered glimpsing a stranger lurking outside moments before a blunt object struck her head. Then she had a hazy memory of being held down and a needle prick in her arm. Someone had injected her with something to knock her out, she believed. It was a scene straight out of a horror film, and yet still, police found no fingerprints, no footprints, no DNA, nothing beyond Cindy's injuries and the bizarre threats left behind. By now, local law enforcement began to doubt Cindy's story. Over months of investigation, they had failed to turn up a single solid lead or witness besides Cindy herself. How could a predator be brazen enough to attack repeatedly, yet leave no trace? It didn't add up. Quietly, some officers began to wonder, was Cindy orchestrating these incidents herself? It seemed unthinkable. Why would anyone subject themselves to such terror and pain? But the alternative theory, that a sadistic stalker was clever enough to evade a years-long manhunt, was equally hard to swallow. In an effort to catch the culprit, or possibly catch Cindy in the act, police placed Cindy under 24-hour surveillance. For days at a time, teams of officers watched her home, and during those surveilled periods, nothing happened. Not a single call, note, or broken window. But almost immediately after surveillance ended, Cindy would report a new incident. It was as if the stalker knew when the police were watching, or, the police thought, as if Cindy herself needed privacy to stage the events. Cindy's parents angrily dismissed that notion, insisting that of course a would-be attacker would lie low if police were swarming around. It proved nothing. Still, the seeds of doubt had been planted in the investigation. Cindy's mental state was deteriorating under the relentless stress. Friends said she was exhausted, jumpy, and beginning to doubt her own sanity. She lost weight and sleep. On several occasions, she even asked her friend Agnes and Agnes's husband, Tom, to stay overnight at her house because she was too afraid to be alone. One of those nights, Cindy's internal terrors broke out into real life again. In the dead of night, a loud thump jolted Agnes and Tom awake. Moments later, Cindy came running to their room, eyes wide, whispering that she heard something downstairs. Tom nodded. He'd heard it too, like a door closing. The trio gathered courage and descended the stairs, hearts pounding. A flicker of orange light danced on the walls. Flames. The basement was on fire, smoke already curling up the staircase. Panicked, Agnes grabbed the phone to call for help. The line was dead. Tom threw on a coat and ran outside to yell for a neighbor to phone the fire department. As he sprinted onto the street, he nearly collided with a figure lurking by the curb. A man. Tom shouted for help, but the mystery man turned and ran off into the darkness without a word. Thanks to the neighbor's quick call, firefighters contained the blaze before it gutted the house. Investigators determined it had been intentionally set in the basement. But there were puzzling details. No sign of forced entry, and no disturbances on the dusty windowsill through which an intruder might have snuck in. Cindy's behaviour also struck police as odd. She claimed she'd been out walking her dog at 3 a.m. when the fire started. To detectives, this sounded suspicious. Why would a terrorised woman wander alone in the dead of night? Cindy had an explanation. The dog woke her. She couldn't rest, so she went out briefly, but by now officers were openly rolling their eyes. They suspected Cindy had started the fire herself for attention or as a cry for help, nearly endangering her friends in the process. It was all too much for Cindy. Shortly after, suffering a breakdown of nerves, Cindy's doctor committed her to a psychiatric ward for her own safety. He feared she was becoming suicidal under the weight of it all. During her 10-week stay in the hospital, away from the threats and chaos, Cindy's condition stabilized. Friends hoped that maybe if she had been staging incidents unconsciously, the separation might break the cycle. And if not, well, at least she was safe from any real stalker for the moment. Cindy rarely spoke of the harassment during therapy, but one thing was clear. Being doubted by the police and even some friends had pushed her to a breaking point. The notion that people thought she was doing it to herself deeply hurt and angered her. She insisted she wasn't crazy. Someone was out there, patiently tightening the noose of terror around her life. In the fall of 1988, Cindy James was released from the hospital. She was emotionally fragile but alive, determined to regain control of her life. For a little while, things were quiet again. Cindy even told her family at one point that she finally knew who had been tormenting her all these years. This was a startling admission. For 7 years, she had claimed she didn't recognize the voice or the clues. Now, suddenly, she had a suspect in mind. When pressed for details, Cindy refused. She simply said, "If the police can't solve this, I'll solve it for them." There was a new resolve in her voice, a mix of fear and determination. Those close to her didn't know what she was planning, but they sensed the endgame was approaching. May 1989. Cindy was now 44 years old and still living under a cloud of dread, but trying to move forward. On May 25th, she kept busy with errands around town. She deposited her paycheck at the bank, went to a beauty salon, and chatted with a clerk at a shopping centre while buying a gift for a friend. By evening, Cindy failed to show up to meet that friend for dinner, which immediately raised concern. Cautious as she was, Cindy never no-showed without calling. Family and friends contacted the police, and a search began. Late that night, Cindy's car was found abandoned in a neighborhood parking lot. Inside the car were her groceries and the wrapped gift she'd bought, as if she'd intended to return home, but never made it. Oddly, there was also blood on the driver's side door. Scattered on the ground beside the car were some of Cindy's wallet contents, like she had perhaps dropped them while struggling. But there was no sign of Cindy herself. It was as if she had vanished into the twilight. For 2 excruciating weeks, search parties combed the area. Cindy's parents plastered missing posters around the city, fearing the worst. Then on June 8, 1989, came the grim discovery that brings us full circle. A city worker cutting grass behind that abandoned house spotted something in the weeds. A body. It was Cindy. She was laying on her side in an eerily peaceful pose, considering the brutality evident. Her hands and feet were hog-tied together with cruel knots, and a black nylon stocking was cinched tightly around her neck. Her body was covered in dirt and insect bites, suggesting she had been there for days. Strangest of all, the autopsy would later reveal that Cindy wasn't killed by strangulation or wounds. Instead, her cause of death was an overdose of morphine and other sedative drugs. The image was ghastly and perplexing. A woman who looked like a homicide victim, bound and dumped, yet the forensic evidence pointed to a possible suicide or accidental overdose. Investigators were baffled. Could Cindy have somehow drugged herself, tied herself up in such an elaborate hogtie, and climbed onto the abandoned lot to die? It sounded implausible, almost impossible, and yet that is precisely what some officers would conclude. They noted that the morphine in her system could have taken some time to disable her, potentially giving her a window to bind her own hands and feet. But her family was adamant this was ridiculous. Her father pointed out that no syringe or drinking vessel was found near the body. How could she take a lethal dose and then neatly dispose of the evidence before it killed her? And those knots. It would take an experienced knot specialist mere minutes to tie them, with both hands free. How could Cindy, after consuming enough drugs to kill herself, manage to tie herself up so securely? The more one thought about it, the more mind-bending it became. The coroner's inquest that followed was one of the longest and most perplexing in Canadian history. After hearing from 80-plus witnesses and reviewing the tangled web of incidents, the jury reached a bizarre, yet perhaps fitting conclusion. Cindy James had died from an unknown event. In other words, they could not determine if it was murder, suicide, or accident. It was literally uncategorized. This final verdict only deepened the legend that would grow around Cindy's case. Cindy's friends and family firmly believe someone got away with murder. To them, the idea that Cindy orchestrated 7 years of terror upon herself, culminating in her own violent death, is simply absurd. They point to the horrifying physical attacks, the strangling with the nylon, the knife through her hand, the undeniable bruises and black eyes, even the witness who saw a man outside the night of the fire. How could she possibly injure herself so gravely, time and again, and never slip up and reveal it? How to explain the mysterious man in the shadows, the threatening phone calls that others overheard, the fact that she was so terrified she moved houses and lived in fear? It's hard to imagine anyone inflicting such a long, painful ruse upon themselves. And yet, skeptics, including some investigators, maintain that the most dangerous enemy Cindy faced was within. They cite her intelligence and nursing experience. She had knowledge of drugs and psychology. They note her bouts of depression and that she'd once withheld certain details, suggesting a secret she couldn't bring herself to expose. Maybe Cindy was battling a form of dissociation or a need for attention turned deadly. The evidence supporting this view: every instance of attack happened when no one else directly witnessed an assailant. The stalker's voice on the phone was never recorded. When police watched, nothing occurred, almost as if a part of Cindy couldn't perform under observation. Perhaps most tellingly, in the final act, she somehow ended up alone, in a place she ordinarily never went, precisely when her mysterious foe finally killed her. If Cindy planned to end her life dramatically, might she have composed the perfect final scene of her own horror story? In the end, the truth remains elusive. The story of Cindy James is a bone-chilling puzzle with two solutions, each more disturbing than the other. Either a malignant predator devoted 7 years to psychologically torturing a woman in plain sight, ultimately committing the perfect murder, or Cindy James's own mind unraveled in an unimaginably twisted way, turning her into both victim and villain of a real-life horror. Both possibilities send a shiver down the spine. As the years have passed, no new evidence has definitively surfaced. Cindy's case resides in the cold files, that official cause of death, unknown event, standing like an epitaph to an unsolvable nightmare. Neighbours in Cindy's old Vancouver community still share quiet, fearful whispers about the nurse who was haunted to death. To this day, if you stroll past the lot where her body was found, you might feel an uneasy presence. Perhaps it's the weight of unanswered questions. Perhaps it's Cindy's restless spirit, unable to find peace without knowing why. One thing is certain: Cindy James lived her last years caught in a nightmare that blurs the line between psychological horror and real-world evil. And the scariest part? We still don't know which of those nightmares was true. Was Cindy James truly the target of a cruel puppet master, or had her own mind become the puppet master of her demise? The case remains a chilling enigma. A true horror story with a partly ambiguous twist that keeps even the most seasoned investigators awake at night, haunted by the question of what really happened to Cindy. Whether she was the victim of a cunning, unseen predator or the architect of her own demise, the truth died with her in that overgrown yard. And somewhere between those two possibilities lies the kind of horror no one can ever truly escape. 7 years of terror, and one ending no one can explain.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.